Celine Avery pressed her back against the cold bark of an oak tree and told herself to breathe. Her hands would not stop shaking. The pack ranking ceremony had not even started yet, and already the clearing smelled like tension and pine smoke and something older than both, something she had no name for but felt low in her chest like a stone she had swallowed whole. She was 22 years old. She had attended this ceremony every year since she was 7, always standing near the back, always quiet, always careful not to take up more space than she was allowed. Ayamo Park had never been kind to her, but it had been predictable. She knew the shape of her place in it the way you know the shape of a scar, by touch, in the dark, without having to look. Tonight felt different. She could not explain why. The clearing filled slowly. Wolves came in pairs and small groups, wearing their best, their rank marks pressed into the collars of their jackets or stitched into the sleeves. Celine wore nothing like that. She was Omega class, a rank so low that marking it was almost a cruelty, so she simply wore a dark blue dress her mother had left behind and hoped no one looked at her long enough to find a reason. Alpha Kaya's vein arrived last. He always did. It was a choice he made every year, a small theater of power, the man who did not need to hurry because the ceremony could not begin without him. He was broad-shouldered and sharp-jawed, with the kind of face that photographed well and forgave nothing. The pack parted for him without being asked. That was the thing about Caius. He never had to ask. Celine watched him walk to the center stone, the flat grey slab where the ranking had been called for 300 years, and she felt the familiar cold settle into her limbs. She was not afraid of him exactly. She was afraid of what he represented, which was the certainty that she did not matter. Elder Wren, the oldest female wolf in Ayamo, began the ceremony. Her voice was thin but it carried, the way old things carry, not through force but through the weight of every year behind them. She called names in order of rank, starting at the top. Warriors. Hunters. Trackers. She called them forward one by one and pressed a silver seal to their left hand, and the pack cheered, and each wolf stood a little straighter after. Celine waited. She always waited until near the end. When her name came, it did not come where she expected it. Caius Vin stepped forward before Elder Wren could finish speaking. He raised one hand, and the clearing went quiet so fast it almost felt like a sound in itself. Celine Avery, he said. Not a question. Not an introduction. A verdict. She walked to the center stone because her feet moved before her mind could argue with them. She stood in front of him with the whole pack watching, and she lifted her chin, because that much she could still control. Caius looked at her the way someone looks at a small mistake they have been meaning to correct. You already know why you're here, he said. She did not. She found out in the next 4 minutes, in front of everyone. He pulled out a document, actual paper, which was rare and theatrical, which meant he had planned this carefully, and began to read from it in a loud, clear, completely measured voice. Her father's name. Her father's crimes, committed 12 years ago, when Celine had been 10 years old and had no more control over them than she had over the weather. Misappropriation of pack resources. Breach of the hunting accord. Conduct unbecoming. Her father had been gone for 10 years. He had run. She had stayed. Caius read every line. He did not rush. He let each sentence land and settle before moving to the next one, and the pack around her was completely silent in that way that people go silent when they are watching something they will talk about for years. The sins of a bloodline, Caius said, folding the paper, do not disappear because the man carrying them ran away. They transfer. The Ayamo pack does not shelter corrupted lineages. Celine's mouth was dry. She said nothing. There was nothing in the pack law that required her to speak, and she understood instinctively that anything she said would be used against her, not for her. You are stripped of your rank, Caius said. Effective tonight. You have no standing within Ayamo. You are not a member of this pack. Somewhere behind her, someone laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. She felt it go through her like cold water, not the stripping of her rank, which she had half expected the moment she heard her name called early, but the laugh. One person laughing, and no one telling them to stop. She looked at Elder Wren. Ren's face was carefully still. Not cruel. Not kind. Just very old and very practiced at the art of surviving things by not becoming part of them. Celine looked at Caius one more time. She needed to see his face when she did the only thing left available to her, which was to leave. He looked satisfied. Not happy, exactly. Satisfied, the way someone looks after they have finished a task they found unpleasant but necessary. That was what she was to him. A task. A loose thread he had finally tucked away. She turned and walked out of the clearing. She did not run. That was the one thing she promised herself, she would not run, because running was what you did when you were afraid, and she was past afraid. There was something on the other side of afraid that she had reached without knowing it, some flat and quiet country where the ground was hard and she could still put one foot in front of the other. The pack watched her go. Some turned away before she reached the tree lane. Some did not. She kept walking until the firelight was gone and the voices were gone and there was only the dark and the smell of pine and the sound of her own breathing, which was unsteady but present. She found a fallen log 50 yards into the trees and sat down on it. She pressed her hands flat against her knees. She looked up through the branches at the sky, and the moon was there, full and white and enormous, and it was looking back. She cried. She had told herself she would not, but she did, and it was not quiet or elegant. It was the kind of crying that comes from somewhere so deep in the chest you cannot locate it, only feel it leaving. When it was over, she felt hollowed out. Light. She wiped her face with the back of her hand and sat still and listened to the forest and thought about where she would sleep, and whether the pack cabin she had shared with 2 other female omegas would still have her belongings in it by morning, or whether they would be outside on the ground. She was still thinking about this when the light came. It did not flash or announce itself. It simply arrived, the way dawn arrives, gradually, then all at once. It came from the ground, from her own shadow, rising up through her like something that had been waiting a long time for the right moment to move. It was silver white and warm, not cold the way moonlight usually is, and she looked down at her hands and saw them glowing. She stood up fast and stepped back from herself, which was not possible and was happening anyway. Her wolf stirred. But this was not the wolf she had grown up with, the small, careful, quiet wolf that matched her rank and her life and her habit of making herself smaller. This was something else. Something underneath that wolf. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time and was now, because of tonight, finally done sleeping. Celine stood alone in the dark with her glowing hands and her new wolf stirring and the full moon watching, and she thought, very clearly and with no particular emotion, something is about to change. She was right. But she did not yet know how completely. Owen Fletcher had been a better wolf in Ayamore for 6 years. He was not a cruel man. He told himself that often enough that he mostly believed it. On the night of the ranking ceremony, he stood in the clearing and watched Caius Vane strip Celine of everything she had, and he did not speak. He told himself it was because there was nothing he could say. He told himself the law was the law. He told himself it was not his place. He repeated all of this to himself again 3 days later when Caius called him and 2 other betters to a private meeting. The girl is still in the territory, Caius said. He said it the way he said everything, with the flat certainty of a man who expected the world to organize itself according to his preferences. She needs to understand that her presence is no longer welcome. Owen looked at the floor. He thought about the way Celine had walked out of the clearing, not running, just walking, her back straight, her face unreadable. He had thought about that walk more than he expected to over the past 3 days. There was something in it that he could not identify and could not stop saying. "How persuasive do you want us to be?" the other beta, a white man named Craig, asked. Caius picked up his glass from the desk. "Persuasive enough," he said. Owen went. He went because he always went when Caius told him to, because that was what you did inside a pack structure that had kept you safe and fed and positioned for 6 years. You did not bite the hand. You kept your head down. You stayed on the right side. They tracked her by scent to the eastern edge of the forest, where the oldest trees grew and the roots broke through the soil like fingers reaching for something underground. She was there when they found her, standing in a small clearing, facing away from them as if she had been waiting. She turned around when she heard them coming. Owen stopped. Not because Caius had told him to stop. Because something in the air changed. The temperature did not drop, if anything, it was the opposite. The air warmed. The quality of light changed, and for a moment he thought it was his eyes playing tricks, because the moon was full above the canopy, but this light was not coming from above. It was coming from her. Celine Avery stood in the center of the clearing and looked at them with dark, still eyes, and the light around her was silver-white and glowing, and Owen's wolf, his beta wolf, which had faced things in its years that an omega wolf should not theoretically be able to match, pressed itself small inside him and tried to make itself invisible. "You should go back," Celine said. Her voice was quiet. Not threatening. Just certain, in the way the light around her was certain. It was simply there. It was simply real. It did not require her to argue for it. Craig took a step forward. He was the kind of man who did not take suggestions easily. What happened next, Owen would spend the rest of his life struggling to describe accurately. He would say, "She shifted." But that was not quite right, because a shift was something he had seen 1,000 times, something with stages and sounds and effort. What Celine did was different. Her wolf did not emerge from her so much as it was revealed, as if the human shape she wore was a door that had always been closed, and it simply opened, and what was behind it stepped out. The wolf was white. Not pale gray, not cream, white the way snow is white, the way the center of a flame is white. It stood as tall as Owen's chest at the shoulder, which was not possible for an omega wolf, and its eyes were the color of the light it wore, and it looked at the three of them with an expression that was not threatening but was, in its complete absence of fear, more frightening than any threat Owen had ever faced. Craig turned and ran. He did not decide to run. He simply ran. The third beta, a younger man named Evan who had never been in any real situation in his life, was already gone. Owen had not seen him leave. Owen stood where he was. He did not know why. His own wolf was screaming at him to run, and he was standing still, and he was looking at Celine Avery's wolf, and the wolf was looking back at him. Then the white wolf turned away and walked deeper into the trees. Owen ran all the way back to park territory and then sat down on the ground at the border and stayed there for a long time with his hands between his knees, thinking about a walk he could not stop seeing, and a wolf that had turned away from him rather than toward him, and what that difference meant. Caius was waiting for his report. Owen knew what he was supposed to say. He knew exactly how Caius expected this to have gone. He sat on the ground at the border and thought about what it meant that he could not make himself lie about it, and that was how he understood, without quite being able to say it, that something had shifted in him too. He got up. He walked to the main hall. He told Caius the truth. The silence in the room after he finished was very long. Caius set down his glass with a precise click. "An omega wolf," he said. "She is not an omega wolf anymore," Owen said. "I do not think she was ever only that." Caius looked at him in a way that was not comfortable to be looked at. Then he said, "Find out what that thing is. Whatever it is, I want to know before anyone else does." Owen left. He had a feeling, sitting low in his stomach, that Caius was already too late. Word traveled through the forest the way word always traveled, faster than feet, slower than fear, arriving in pieces before it arrived whole. Within 48 hours, there were stories. An omega wolf who glowed. A white wolf the size of a warrior. 3 betas who had gone into the eastern forest and come back too short, the third with the specific look of a man who had seen something rearrange his understanding of the world. On the third day after the night Owen could not stop thinking about, a rider came to Ironmore from the Stoneback Park, the oldest neighboring territory, run by Elder Alpha Renner, who was 71 years old and had forgotten more about wolf history than most alphas ever knew. The rider delivered a sealed letter, addressed not to Caius Vane but to Celine Avery, and addressed with an accuracy that suggested Renner somehow already knew where she was. Caius opened the letter. This was a violation of a dozen protocols. He did not care. Inside was a single line in Renner's slanted handwriting: "I know what woke in you. You are not alone in this. Come when you are ready." Caius read it 3 times. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in his pocket and told the rider there was no letter. But Owen had been standing in the hallway. He had seen the rider come in. He had seen Caius's face while reading, and it was the first time in 6 years that Owen had ever seen something on Caius's face that looked like the beginning of fear. He left that night and found Celine in the eastern forest and gave her the message from memory, word for word, because it was the first genuinely useful thing he had done in 6 years and he was not going to waste it. She listened without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. He thought about Craig running. He thought about Evan disappearing before the situation even fully developed. He thought about Caius's face reading that letter. "I watched you walk out of that clearing," he said. "And I have not been able to think about much else since." She looked at him carefully. Not with trust, trust was something that would take time they had not had yet. But with the kind of assessment that said she was taking him seriously, which was more than she owed him. "I do not know what I am yet," she said. "Elder Renner does," he said. Celine looked at the moon through the canopy. It was not full tonight, it was 1 night past full, slightly diminished, but still there. Still watching. "All right," she said. They left for Stoneback territory at first light. The Stoneback Park's main settlement sat at the base of a granite ridge that had given it its name, a long spine of grey rock that ran along the northern edge of the territory like the back of something ancient sleeping beneath the ground. Celine had never been there before. She noticed everything, the way the trees were older and taller than in Ironmore, the way the pack members who passed them on the path looked at her openly instead of sideways, the absence of whatever particular tension Ironmore carried in its air. Elder Arthur Renner was waiting in a stone building at the settlement center, not a house exactly, more of a gathering hall, with high ceilings and walls lined with shelves of books and maps and things that looked like they had been collected over a very long life. Renner herself matched her building. She was small and dense and unhurried, with white hair cut close to her head and eyes that were brown but so dark they were nearly black. She looked at Celine the way people look at something they have been expecting for a long time and are glad to finally see arrive. Owen stayed near the door. This was not his meeting. Renner gestured to the chair across from hers and waited for Celine to sit. "You have questions," Renner said. "I have nothing else," Celine said. Renner nodded. This was apparently the right answer. She did not begin with history, which Celine had half expected. She began with a question. "When the light came, did it feel like something entering you or something leaving you?" Celine thought about the fallen log. The crying. The light rising from the ground through her shadow. "Neither," she said. "It felt like something waking up that had been there the whole time." Renner said nothing for a moment. Then she reached for a book on the shelf beside her, old, spine-cracked, with no title visible from the outside, and opened it to a page near the middle and turned it so Celine could see. The illustration was crude, drawn by hand in faded ink, but unmistakable. A white wolf. A woman standing beside it with her hand resting on its back. Light coming from them both in lines that went outward in all directions. "Moon wolf," Renner said. "Not a type. Not a class. A bond. The goddess's direct response to injustice that pack law failed to correct. It has appeared 5 times in the recorded history of the Northern Territories. The last time was 70 years ago. I was 1 year old. My mother saw it. She spent the rest of her life writing down what she witnessed." Celine looked at the illustration. She looked at it for a long time. "What happened to the woman?" she asked. "She lived a very long life," Renner said. "She was not an alpha. She never took a pack seat. She built something different. Something the old law does not have a name for, because the old law was written by people who were afraid of what she represented." What did she represent? That the goddess notices, Renner said simply. That power given wrongly can be called back. That the hierarchy every alpha treats as permanent is, in fact, conditional. The room was very quiet. Somewhere outside, the granite ridge held the morning cold against the settlement the way stone holds cold, slowly releasing it, degrees at a time. Kaya's vein intercepted the letter you sent me, Celine said. Rena's expression did not change. I know. I sent two. Celine looked at her. The one he intercepted used the words I knew he would fear enough to make him act on it. The one that reached you through Owen Fletcher used only what you needed to know. Rena folded her hands in her lap. I have been watching Ayamon for 3 years. I was watching the night of your ranking ceremony. I heard what he did before my rider even left. You were watching me? I was watching the territory, Rena said. You were what I was watching for. Celine sat with that. She was not sure how to feel about being anticipated, about having been the shape of a prediction someone else had been carrying. It felt strange. Not entirely unwelcome, but strange. He will move against me, she said. He already has, Rena said. 3 betas in the eastern forest. I imagine that did not go the way he planned. It did not. He will try again, but not directly. Kaya's vein is many things. He is not stupid. He will reach for the law before he reaches for force, because reaching for force against a moon-wolf bond is something he will not be able to make look justified. He will call you rogue. He will call the bond a corruption. He will find people willing to say they are afraid of you. And they will not be wrong, Celine said quietly. To be afraid. Rena looked at her very directly. No. They will not be wrong. But fear of the moon is not the same as being threatened by it. That is a distinction Caius will try to collapse, and that is the distinction you must hold. Owen coughed from near the door. Both women looked at him. I am sorry, he said, but there is a rider in the courtyard from the Ashwood Park. They are requesting a meeting. They say they heard about the ceremony. They say they have questions about the moon-wolf bond and want to be present when it is formally recognized. Rena and Celine looked at each other. Word travels, Rena said. Faster than feet, Celine said. Slower than fear. Celine stood. Her wolf was still inside her, quiet and enormous, like a held breath. She looked at the illustration again in the open book on the table, the woman with her hand on the white wolf's back, the light going outward in all directions. What is the formal process? She asked. For recognition. The moon trial, Rena said. Ancient law. Older than any living alpha. When invoked by a moon-wolf bond, every alpha within 3 territories is summoned by the goddess herself. Not by me. Not by you. The summons appears on their skin, and they cannot refuse it. The trial is not a debate. It is not an argument. It is a testimony of what is, and what the goddess has determined must be corrected. Celine was quiet for a long moment. Caius will fight it. He will try, Rena said. He is very practiced at making wrong things look like necessary things. But the moon wolf does not argue. It only has to be present. The judgment comes from what the assembled alphas feel when they are in its presence. They cannot fake what they feel. Their wolves will not let them. And if they kneel, then the goddess has spoken, Rena said. And Caius' vein is finished. Celine walked to the door. Owen stepped aside. Outside, the rider from Ashwood was waiting in the stone courtyard, and beyond him the granite ridge held a code, and beyond the ridge the sky was enormous and pale blue and went on in every direction without walls. She thought about walking out of a clearing with her back straight and her feet moving. She thought about sitting on a log in the dark and crying, the kind of crying that hollows you out and leaves you lighter. She thought, I was always going to be here. I just had to survive long enough to arrive. How do I invoke the moon trial? She asked, not turning around. Behind her, she heard Rena close the book. You already have, Rena said. The moment the bond woke in you, the trial was invoked. All that remains is the night. And the night, she said, is coming. Caius Vane discovered the summons on his left forearm on a Tuesday morning, 4 days after his riders from the Ashwood and Greyford Parks returned with troubling news and carefully neutral faces. He was standing in the bathroom of the main hall when he saw it, silver-white lines on his skin, thin as thread, forming a mark he had never seen in his lifetime but recognized the way you recognize the face of someone from a story you were told as a child. Old. Precise. Impossible to misread. He stood very still and looked at it for a long time. Then he called his inner circle together and said, in a voice that gave none of what he felt away, "We have a problem." The problem was this: 4 alphas had already confirmed they were coming. Rena of Stoneback. Alpha Drew of Ashwood. Alpha Lena of Greyford. Alpha Marcus of the Hollow Park, who Caius had not spoken to in 3 years because of a border disagreement that had never fully resolved. All 4 had sent word within hours of receiving their own summons, and their word was not a question about whether to attend. Their word was notification that they would be there. Caius had spent 48 hours trying to find a legal argument against the Mon trial. He had pulled every record he owned, sent for text from Park's 2 territories over, contacted an old legal advisor named Victor who had spent 30 years interpreting Park law before retiring to a cabin by a lake to grow vegetables and regret things. Victor had called him back in less than an hour. "There is no argument against the Mon trial," Victor said, and his voice had in it a quality that Caius recognized, with deep discomfort, as something adjacent to awe. "The Mon trial is older than the written law. The written law exists within it, not above it. You cannot invoke the written law to dismiss the Mon trial. That is like trying to use a puddle to put out a river." "Then I challenge the validity of the bond," Caius said. Victor was quiet for a moment. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the girl is an Omega with a history of unstable lineage, and what she is calling a Moon Wolf bond is a psychological response to the stress of her removal from Park's standing." Another silence. "Caius," Victor said, carefully, "the 4 alphas who have already confirmed attendance have each been marked by the goddess. You cannot argue with a mark on someone else's skin. The trial is not a hearing. There is no judge to appeal to. The assembled alphas will be present when the wolf appears. What they feel will be the verdict. You cannot cross-examine a feeling." Caius ended the call. He stood at his desk and looked at the summons mark on his forearm, which was still there, silver-white, unhurried, making no demands but simply being present the way a fact is present. He had 3 days before the appointed night. He spent those 3 days making calculations. The one thing Caius Vane was genuinely good at, perhaps the one thing he had ever been truly excellent at, better than any alpha in 3 territories, was reading a situation and finding the angle that made it survivable. He had built IMO's current strength on that gift. He had consolidated power through it, maintained peace through it, occasionally bent things through it that other alphas would have broken. He was not a cruel man, he had always told himself. He was a strategic one. He began to construct the narrative he would bring to the Mon trial. Not a legal argument, Victor had closed that door. A story. Stories were more durable than arguments. Stories got inside people and stayed. The story was this: Celine Avery was a troubled young woman from a troubled bloodline who had experienced something real and disorienting when her rank was removed, something her grief had amplified into what looked like a Moon Wolf bond but was, in fact, an expression of the goddess's compassion for the suffering of a damaged soul. Not a corrective force. A healing one. The removal of her rank had been painful, yes. But it had been necessary for the health of the pack. And now the goddess, in her wisdom, was offering Celine a new path, one that the pack could support and welcome, under Caius's guidance, if the assembled alphas would simply allow reason to accompany the emotion of the moment. He practiced it. He practiced the timing, the pauses, the places where he would lower his voice and the places where he would let it carry. He had delivered difficult truths before. He knew how to make people feel that he was giving them something when he was, in fact, taking something away. He was ready. What he was not ready for was the night itself. The appointed place was the same clearing where the ranking ceremony had been held, a choice that was not accidental, that had been made by something older than preference, since none of the assembled wolves had consciously selected it. They had simply arrived there, the way the marked skin had known when to appear and what to say. The clearing chose itself. The 5 alphas came at dusk. Rena of Stoneback arrived first, with 2 members of her council and no ceremony. Drew of Ashwood came next, broad and deliberate, a man who chose his words slowly and meant all of them. Lena of Greyford arrived with her mate, who stayed outside the clearing's boundary out of respect for the ritual. Marcus of the Hollow Pack came alone and stood at the far edge without speaking to anyone. Caius came last. He always came last. Tonight, for the first time, the theater of it felt different, not like authority but like avoidance. Owen Fletcher was there, standing slightly apart from the Ironmore contingent, in a position that made it clear he was not quite Ironmore anymore and not quite anything else yet. Caius saw him and said nothing. Celine came from the trees. She was alone. She had not brought Rena or Owen or anyone. She walked into the clearing the way she had walked out of it, without running, without performing, simply moving through space that belonged to her as much as to anyone, which was something she had only recently understood to be true. She wore the same dark blue dress. The assembled alphas watched her cross the clearing. Caius watched. He had his story ready. He had his pauses and his lowered voice. He had everything he needed. She stopped in the center of the clearing, at the flat grey stone. And then she was simply still. The light came the way it always came now, not flashing, not announcing itself, rising from within her like something that had found a door and was no longer interested in keeping it closed. Silver-white and warm, it spread outward from where she stood in a circle that widened slowly, touching the ground, touching the roots of the trees at the clearing's edge, touching the assembled wolves one by one. Caius felt it reach him. He braced against it the way he braced against everything, with the part of him that had always known how to hold a line. Celine's wolf came. He had been told about the wolf by 3 different sources. He had adjusted his expectations. He had prepared himself. He had not been prepared. The white wolf stood in the center of the clearing and looked at nothing in particular and everything at once, and its light was not threatening and did not move toward any of them and made no sound, and Caius felt something happen inside him that he had never felt before in his 41 years of living. His wolf went quiet. Not subdued. Not commanded. Quiet. The way a man goes quiet when he suddenly, in the middle of a familiar room, understands something about himself that he has been not understanding for a very long time. Alpha Drew knelt first. He did not decide to. His knees simply went to the ground, and his head bowed, and his wolf inside him settled with the soft sound a fire makes when it stops fighting and becomes warm. He was on his knees before he understood that was what was happening, and once he understood, he stayed there because it felt right in a way that had nothing to do with submission and everything to do with recognition. Rena knelt next. Lena after her. Marcus after that. Caius did not kneel. He stood. He stood through Drew and Rena and Lena and Marcus, and he held his line the way he had always held lines, through the force of a wood that had never encountered something it could not eventually outlast. He was still building his story in his head. He was still running through the pauses. The wolf looked at him. It did not move toward him. It simply turned its head, and its eyes, the color of the light it wore, found him, and it simply looked. Caius's story fell apart. Not because the wolf was threatening. Not because of force or sound or any of the things he had braced against. It fell apart because the wolf's gaze was completely clear, the way very still water is clear, and in that clarity he could see, for the first time without his story around it, exactly what he had done. He had stood in a clearing 4 weeks ago and read a list of crimes aloud in front of every person a young woman had ever known, and she had done nothing to deserve it except exist in a bloodline that had wronged no one in the room. He had called her a stain. He had watched someone laugh. He had not told them to stop. He had folded his paper and felt satisfied. He was still that man. He was that man right now, standing in the same clearing, trying to find the angle. His knees went down. It was not graceful. He did not choose it. His wolf went to the ground before his mind caught up, and then his body followed his wolf, and he was kneeling on the cold earth of the clearing with his hands flat on the grass and his head down, and the white wolf's light was warm on the back of his neck. He knelt for a long time. When he looked up, Celine Avery was standing beside her wolf with her hand resting on its back, and she was looking at him with the same expression he had struggled to read in the clearing 4 weeks ago, not triumph. not satisfaction. Something much quieter, and much harder to bear, which was simply that she was looking at him clearly and seeing what was there. The moon trial is complete, Rena said from where she knelt. Her voice was not loud but it carried. The goddess has spoken. The record stands. Kaya stayed on his knees. Around him, one by one, the other alphas rose. He stayed down a little longer. He was not performing it. He simply could not stand up yet, and for the first time in a very long time, he was not going to perform anything. The white wolf turned and walked back into the trees. The light went with it. The clearing was dark again, just firelight from the torches someone had placed at the perimeter, just the smell of pine and cold earth, just 4 alphas and a former alpha and Owen Fletcher standing apart, and Celine Avery standing at the center stone. Owen looked at Caius for a long time. Caius did not look at him. Rena walked to Celine and said something Caius could not hear. Celine nodded once. Caius got to his feet. He stood in his clearing, the clearing that had been his clearing for 11 years, where he had called every ceremony and spoken every verdict and been the last to arrive because the event could not begin without him, and he understood that this night was the last night it would be his in any of the ways that had mattered. He left before anyone spoke to him. Not the way Celine had left 4 weeks ago, not with her stillness or her straight back or whatever that quality was that she carried without seeming to try. He left the way people live when they have finally run out of the right words and have not yet found the wrong ones. Behind him, the clearing held the remaining warmth of the white wolf's light for longer than natural light had any business lasting. No one commented on it. They simply stood in it and let it be. The IMO pack met 3 days after the moon trial, in the same hall where Caius had held his inner circle meetings for 11 years. He was not there. He had left the territory on the morning after the trial, without notice, with a single bag. Owen heard he had gone north. He heard Caius had family there, a sister who had not spoken to him in 5 years. He heard things after that, smaller things, diminishing things, the kind of information that trails a person when a person stops being powerful enough to control their own story. Owen did not track it closely. What he tracked closely was the meeting in the hall, which was the first he had attended in months where he did not feel the specific weight of performing his role correctly. The elders held it. Elder Wren, who had stood still the night of the ranking ceremony with her practiced old face, spoke first. She said the right things. She named what had happened. She said that the pack had failed in its duty of protection, that the written law had been used as a tool of harm rather than justice, that the Moon trial's verdict was unambiguous. She said all of this with the measured precision of a woman who had been preparing to say it for a long time and was relieved to finally have occasion. Owen sat in the back and thought about what relief meant when it arrived 4 weeks too late. Celine was not at the meeting. Owen had asked her, and she had said, "It is not my meeting to be at." He had thought about that for a day before he understood what she meant. The meeting was IMO doing what it should have done before the ceremony, acknowledging what was right. That acknowledgement was real and necessary and she was glad it was happening. But it was happening because it now cost them nothing, and she was not interested in standing in the room while people took credit for wisdom they had chosen not to exercise when it was hard. She had said that with no bitterness. That was the thing about Celine that he was still adjusting to. She said true things without bitterness, which was harder than it sounded. The pack offered her the alpha seat. She turned it down. Owen was with her when the official offer came, delivered in a letter by a young pack runner who looked like he expected to be thanked for delivering something tremendous. Celine read it, thanked the runner politely, and set it on the ground beside the camp she had made in the eastern forest, where she had been living with a small group of wolves who had simply started showing up over the past 2 weeks. They were not all from IMO. 2 were from Greyford. One was a male wolf from a pack Owen had never heard of, who said he had felt the Moon trial's verdict from 60 miles away and had walked toward it without being able to explain why. "You should think about the seat," Owen said. "I have thought about it," Celine said. "The answer is no. IMO needs structure. IMO needs to build its own structure," she said. "A structure I build for them is just a different chaos. The form would change. The problem would not. He sat with that. Then what are you building here? He asked. She was standing at the edge of the camp, looking at the place where the eastern forest opened slightly and let the sky in, a window of blue above the oldest trees. The white wolf was somewhere in the trees behind them. It was always somewhere in the trees, not far, not demanding attention but present in the way a heartbeat is present, steady and ongoing and not requiring thought to continue. Something the old law does not have a name for, she said. I will know what to call it when it is finished. Naming it too early makes it smaller than it should be. Elder Renner visited on the 7th day. She came without ceremony, just walked into the camp in the morning with 2 members of her council, both of whom stayed at the edge while Renner came in and sat down on the ground and drank the tea Celine made and did not speak immediately, which was a quality Owen had come to understand was specific to Renner. She collected silence the way other people collected words. 3 more, Renner said, finally. Celine looked at her. 3 more individuals who have felt the bond and are walking toward it. One from as far as the Blue Ridge territory. Renner set down her cup. I need you to understand what is happening. This is not a pack forming around an alpha. This is something older. The Moon Wolf Bond does not gather soldiers. It gathers people who have been failed by the law and have not yet found what replaces it. I know, Celine said. You will need structure eventually. For their sake, not your own. I know that too. And you will need protection. Caius is gone, but Caius was not the only alpha who has ever used the law as a weapon. There will be others who watch what you are building and see a threat. Celine was quiet for a moment. A breeze moved through the camp, carrying pine and cold and the distant smell of the granite ridge. Let them watch, she said. Let them see a woman who walked out of a clearing and did not run, and what came after. Renner looked at her for a long time. Then she did something Owen had never seen her do, she smiled. Not politely. Genuinely, with the full unself-conscious weight of it, like a person who has been right about something for a very long time and is only now getting to say so. Owen started building that week. He was not a gifted carpenter, but he was willing, and Celine did not need gifted, she needed walls and a roof and a space where more than one person could sit around a fire without being rained on. He started with the frame. 2 of the Greyford wolves helped. The male from the distant pack turned out to be very good with stone. The structure went up slowly. On the night the roof was closed, Celine stood inside it for the first time and looked up at the beams and then at the people around her, Owen, the 2 Greyford wolves, the stone-gifted male whose name was Eli, 3 new arrivals who had come in the past 4 days, Elder Wren who had shown up the morning after the Ayamo meeting and not left, and she said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, thank you. Not for the building. For being there. On the night the full moon returned, 1 month after the ranking ceremony that had stripped everything from her and started everything else, Celine sat outside the new building on the cold ground and looked up through the trees at the sky. She did not feel hollowed out. She did not feel like crying. She felt the specific weight of everything that had happened, which was considerable, and she felt the specific lightness that comes from having carried a weight to its destination and set it down in the right place. The white wolf came out of the trees and lay down beside her. Its warmth was enormous and steady. Its breathing was slow. The light it wore was soft at this distance, barely visible, a faint silver at the edges where its fur met the dark. Celine rested her hand on the wolf's side. She felt the rise and fall of its breath. She looked up at the moon, which was full again, which was simply there the way it was always there, making no demands, asking nothing, not requiring acknowledgement to continue being present. She did not thank it. She did not speak. She simply sat with the wolf and the moon and the cold and the new building behind her with its warm light leaking through the cracks in the door, and the people inside it who were still, slowly, becoming whatever they were going to become together. She would name it when it was ready. She would know the name when she heard it. Not before. She had learned it walking out of a clearing in the dark, learned it sitting on a fallen log, learned it in the light that rose through her shadow like something that had been waiting for her to stop pretending she was only as small as the world had told her she was, that naming things too early was how you made them smaller than they were meant to be. She waited. The moon watched. The wolf breathed. The night went on.